Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sharon Bonney. I'm the CEO for the Coalition on Adult Basic Education, and I'm pleased to welcome you to Reading from a Distance webinar. I'm going to turn this over to Essential Education with Dan Griffith. They are the wonderful sponsor of today's webinar. They make it possible for this webinar to be offered free of charge to all of our members. So Dan, I'll turn this to you.
Thank you, Sharon. Appreciate it. Let me share my screen real quick. Oh,
Yep, just 1 second. There you go.
I always beat you to the punch on that. So. All right, thanks. Thank you again. We love being able to sponsor these webinars for COABE. This one is especially great for us because we've had the distinct pleasure to work with Dr. Stewart in the past. And so we're grateful to be able to support her in bringing these great reading skills to you. In fact, she helped us develop the professional development course we have called Identifying and Remediating Reading Skill Difficulties. It's a terrific online course that you can take. It's about 3 to 4 hours probably to go straight through it. But once you have access to it, you have lifetime access to it. So you can come back and review the skills, review the sections, look at it again, implement things in your class, and then try them out, and then come back and kind of look at it again and metacognitively decide if you're on target or need to adjust a little bit more. So we encourage you to look into that. You can find more details about that at essentialed.com/educators. And I believe my colleague Ashley is probably putting something in the chat window as well. We do have a new series of workbooks in reading skills as well that we'd just like to highlight for a moment. And if you have an iPhone right now, you might just pull your phone out and use your camera. If you have an Android device, it will take a QR code reader, but with an iPhone, you can just take your cell phone out, put your camera up to the screen. I tried this earlier. It actually worked for me. Hopefully it will for you as well. And hold your camera up to that QR code that I'm showing up at the top here, and it'll pull up the lesson in our program on subjects and verbs. So these workbooks are really cool because they integrate in a blended learning fashion through QR codes, the technology that supports student learners. And again, if you want to try it and you have an iPhone handy or an Android device with a QR code reader, you can get that right on the screen. There are actually 6 workbooks that are sold as 10 packs, starting from a NRS level 2 up to TABE level D or higher level content. Things like analyzing text and point of view. And then we have our HSC workbook, Essential Reading Skills as well. So these workbooks, we have samplers of all of these we can send you so you can try out the lessons and get a chance to see how the print content could support you in your classroom. And if you'd like to see any of that information, again, you can go to our website at essentialed.com/educators. You can always email me at dan@essentialed.com, and I'll make sure you get to the right person. And with that, I will turn it back to Sharon and COABE, and we appreciate again all the work that you're doing in the field of adult education. And if there's anything we can do to help support y'all, just let us know.
Dan, thank you so much. We really appreciate that, and wonderful products and services for our members. And I just want to make a quick comment. You know, we've been partnering with Essential Education really since 2010. So it's been a 10-year partnership, and we've just watched them grow and expand their products and services for the COABE membership and for the field at large. And we're just super grateful for that. So thank you very much, Dan.
Yep.
Appreciate that. I have just a few quick slides to share with you all. I'm going to do this quickly because I know really we want to get to this presentation, and it's going to be wonderful because Carmine has quite a bit to share with us here. I did want to mention that our conference has gone virtual. It's going to be June 29th through July 9th, and we're going to have more details on that. But if you are registered, you can bring a guest for free. And if you are registered and don't have a guest to bring, you can contact us and sort of, we call it a share the love list, where you can send us, you can let us know that you have an additional ticket that can be used, and we can then extend it to those that don't have funding. So just go to www.coabe.org for more details on that. I also just wanted to mention that our COABE survey on COVID-19 will end on June 1st. We've had over 1,300 responses, but we'd love to get to 1,500. So if you've not responded yet and you'd like to tell us how you're dealing with this crisis, please go to this link. I'll put it in the chat box as well. and it's also on our website, but we would love to hear from you so that we can gather as much data as possible. And now for the star of our show, Ms. Carmine Stewart. So Carmine is the president and CEO of Aspire Consulting and Educational Services, conducting research, evaluation, assessment, data analysis, teacher preparation, and professional development training for school districts and adult literacy agencies. She's the program director at Seeds of Literacy in Cleveland, Ohio, and is an adjunct professor at Cleveland State University, where she teaches future educators in the Adult Learning and Development and Curriculum Foundations Department. And I learned today that she also has 3 jobs. She's amazing. So please help me to welcome Carmen. Please welcome her in the chat box and put any questions in the Q&A. I will stop sharing here.
Ready. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Okay, well, hello everybody. I don't have to introduce myself after that introduction, so I'll just jump right on into our session because I have a lot that I want to share with you. This is Reading from a Distance. And so what I would like to do today is give you a tour of a free resource that we use. In my introduction, Sharon shared that I work with a program, Seeds of Literacy, or work for a program, Seeds of Literacy. And one of the biggest investments we've made in the last year is in our program serving beginning readers. So a lot of programs will accept anyone, but they don't necessarily have services or the training for the folks who are at the very, very low level. And so what we've done is we've used this ReadWorks tool that's available free online to allow our tutors to work with our students on several different components of reading. So I'd like to give you a tour of that resource. And then I'd like to review the components, the 5 components of reading. If you've ever attended one of my sessions before, this will not be brand new for you. But I feel like it's important to talk about the fact that those all exist and to give at least a little bit of information about what they are. I have done 3-hour workshops on all 5 of those components, so you're not going to walk away today knowing everything, but I want to at least give you an idea of what they all are so you can see how you can use the tool to address the 4 of those that we're going to cover. Then we'll talk about how we can use ReadWorks for distance learning, and then that'll be the end of it. So let's get going. So the first thing that I'm going to do is show you actually how to use this tool in real time. So I'm going to go to the website, and I'm going to show you from the student-facing side and from the instructor-facing side. So you can see I'm already logged in here. I'm actually going to log out so you can see what the initial screen looks like. So it'll give you a student login option as well as a login option for you as an instructor. When I log in, it's going to ask me to enter my email address and a password. And really when we started using this tool, the purpose was because we wanted to improve our students' reading fluency, their ability to read quickly, accurately, and with expression. And we wanted a tool that would allow them to practice that, whether they had a tutor with them or whether they were learning from home. And so this tool allows us to do that. So first, I'm going to explain that they have reading passages. So if you click on reading passages, it'll bring up every reading passage that's a part of this system. You'll notice for each reading passage that there's a grade level. There's also a Lexile level. I actually prefer to we set up classes, and we set up classes using the National Reporting Standard levels because I don't like to talk to students about grade levels. They get really, it can be really offensive to reference grade levels, so we use NRS levels. But these are guides for us to let us know what type of complexity of the text it is so that we're giving our students what's appropriate. It also gives you a word count and tells you whether the texts are fiction or nonfiction. There's also an article a day option. If you select the article a day option, what it'll do is it'll give you themes. So this is ancient animals and fossils. And so what it'll do is it'll give you 6 different readings on the exact same theme. And so you can see if I scroll down here, there's an image, there's a bar for audio. So if you want to play the audio, you can. And then the text of the lesson is down below. Okay, so for this one, there are 6 different articles, all on a different topic. This learning from dinosaur fossils is at a grade 3 level. The sauropods is also at a grade 3 level. So they're all around the same level, same content. So if you want to get to reinforce terminologies, reinforce concepts, the article a day sets help with that. Then there's also a paired text option. Excuse me. I think the parent text options are good because a lot of the high school equivalency tests now, a lot of the high school equivalency tests will ask if you can, they ask students to read 2 passages and to be able to analyze and synthesize what they're reading. So the parent text options gives you 2 texts around one topic, and that allows you to focus on one topic, getting students to get the skills of reading 2 texts and then being able to make connections between those 2 texts. We typically use the reading passages because, again, we're piloting this with our tutors, so this is kind of new still. There are also additional curriculum supports like question sets. And let me just say really quickly, because I only have 50 minutes, I have tons of stuff to cover. What they're going to do is they're going to take your questions and then I'm going to respond to them after it, and then they'll email it to you along with the copies of my slides and along with a resource that I'm giving you that we use at Seeds 2 on teaching students how to break words down into syllables, okay? There are also, so the curriculum supports, there are question sets that go with each lesson. There are vocabulary activities that you can use with each lesson. There are ebook options, step reads, and human voice audio. So I'm going to pick one lesson and show you what all of those things mean. So step reads is basically, if this passage is too difficult for a student, step reads gives them that passage at a lower level. The vocabulary is key vocabulary words that are defined in the text itself. The question sets allow you to create multiple choice questions or open-ended questions for the students. And then there's also an ebook option, which allows you for the students to read the passage as a book, which comes with pictures. So you can click the arrow, you can say, please read to me, and highlight the words, or just please read to me. And what the student will see is, if I click play, you probably won't hear this, but you'll see, okay, you do hear it. So it's an opportunity for students to get guided reading, to have fluent reading modeled for them. Okay, so there are those options. And then as well, you can choose. So you notice the text on the right, all of these titles, they change every time I change my preferences. So if I want to see 5th grade passages, then that's going to change, and you'll just see passages that are at that level. If I only want to see passages on science, I can pull just passages on science. If I only want to see the passages of, so let me see, 6th grade science passages, and they're all up here. If I want to see, so these are 5th and 6th grade passages. If I want to get more specific, I can choose that as well. So it gives you a lot of different options for selecting texts. So that's finding content. Now you'll notice, I'm going to take some of these options off here. So you'll notice that, yep, if you're looking for something that they don't have, they'll let you know. So if you notice that with all of these options here, there are these little bookmarks on the side. The bookmarks you select if you want to add that to your list. So if I go to my list here at the top, I can see all of the different content articles that I specifically wanted to pull for my students. So these are all lessons at different grade levels, and then I can further differentiate from there. So for example, if I'm looking at this passage that's talking about climates, it's a 4th grade passage, I can decide that I want to assign that to a class, and I can assign it to my different classes. And again, we set up classes at our school based on the NRS levels. Okay, there's a lot of activity in this question box. Okay, so that's the lists. You can also do assignments and check student progress. So I'm going to look at our ABE 3 level because I know a lot of our students have done that. We don't particularly use these a lot because they don't give us a ton of back-end data, but you can see that if students complete the question sets, they're graded, and then you can tell the students what their progress is. So that's assignments and progress. And class administration just allows you to create classes, to add students to classes. So once you create a class, if I create ABE1, I can add students by clicking here, and then I just type in the students' names to get them into the system. Okay, so once the students are in the system, let me pull this down just a little bit. Okay, hang on a second. once the students are in the system, then they can log in. So here you go back to their beginning website and you go to the student login. When you create a class, they generate a class code. So for this class, we're going to use our class code for our middle level. So when the student logs in, they just enter their class code, they search for their name, and then they get a welcome, and then they enter a password. I recommend using a password like 1234, which is what we use for each student. And what that does is it prevents you from having to help reset passwords over and over again because everyone has the same password. So when the student logs in, they see they see whatever passages are in their class, and then they can open that up. They can look at the questions, they can read the passage, they can listen to the audio of the passage. Okay, so that was just a quick tour of ReadWorks. One of the things that I really like about it is that if students don't have access to computers at home, but they have smartphones, they can still access it. So what you have here are 4 screenshots from an iPhone that show how to log into the site, what the student sees once they get into the site, how you can see the title, the image, and you can see the audio controls, and what the passage looks like. And it's very easy to scroll up and read the whole entire passage. Here are the screenshots for what it looks like on an Android device. Again, logging in once they're in the session, being able to see the audio controls and being able to read the text that's on the screen. And if you have students who are like ours, who either don't have access to a phone or their phones are not smartphones, these lessons really print beautifully, and there's an option on each reading to print it, so they would get a copy of the picture and then they would get the actual text. So it does allow for a lot of versatility if you're depending on what your students' access levels are. So we'll talk about access a little bit more as we go on. So there are 5 components of reading. I think it's really important for us to understand what those are. I'll tell one really quick story. There was a professional developer in a K-12 building, and she was in a 2nd grade classroom with some of her colleagues, and she wanted to show them how to interact with the students. And so she approached this 2nd grader who was reading a book and asked her name, and the girl told her her name, and she asked her if she understood, if she was able to make sense out of what she was reading. And the little girl sighed and was just like really frustrated, like, all my life people have been asking me if I can make sense out of what I'm reading. If I'm at home, my mom is asking me, at school Miss Harrison's asking me, and then here you come asking me if I can make sense out of what I'm reading. And she said, but you know what, no one ever explains to me what makes sense means. So even if you know these 5 components of reading, I'm going to review them really quickly just to make sure we're all using the same language and have the same understanding, because when I'm talking about how to use ReadWorks for these components, I want us to all be thinking about the same thing. So phonemic awareness is understanding that the letters that we use in our alphabet, those 26 letters or graphemes, represent 44 different sounds in the English language. So if a student has phonemic awareness, then that student knows that the B makes the B sound, that D makes the D sound, and that C can make the K or S sound. Phonemic awareness is a skill that is really for students who are beginning, but sometimes you will have a student who's more advanced who might need a little bit of help with being able to hear the sounds and discriminate the sounds auditorily. I had a student who struggled with consonants and consonants, and we had to do a little bit of work with him to get him to hear that distinction so that he could spell and read that distinction as well. Another part of phonemic awareness is helping students learn how to articulate the sounds, how to make the sounds, how to use their lips, their lips, their teeth, the tip of the tongue, their alveolar ridge right behind their teeth, the roof of their mouth, and the middle of their tongue to create the sounds of the English language, and even their throats. So phonemic awareness is helping students to develop the understanding that each letter represents 1 or 2 sounds, and knowing what those sounds are. Students have to have phonemic awareness if they're going to develop phonics awareness, which is the next skill. So phonics consists of the rules that govern how we combine phonemes to make words. Phonics skills allow students to read, it helps students to spell, it helps them to break words down into smaller pieces so that they can decode them. And I kind of refer to it as the order of operations for reading. So in math or in computer programming, there's an order that you do things so that you can, so that you get consistent answers, so that you, there's a process for how to solve them. And it kind of unlocks all of math once you have that down. For me, phonics is that order of operations of reading. Once you know those rules, once you know how to combine different letters, it makes it so much easier to understand language. The National Reading Panel suggests that for phonics instruction, you need systematic phonics instruction, explicit systematic phonics instruction. And what I find a lot of times is people just throw a lot of words at students and expect them to understand and remember them. But with phonics, you're helping to understand whole families of words. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we get to using the tool. We'll talk more about, you can approach families of words. And so students are learning a lot more words at one time than if they are if we just give them something random and expect them to remember it. So I always think of this. I use this with my students. I put up this picture and I ask them when we're working on a phonics, and I ask them to tell me what it is. And so they'll try to sound it out and they'll be like, I don't know what that is, mainly because it doesn't look like any word that they've ever heard before. And then I explain to them that this is the word for fish. And they look at me like I'm crazy, and I show them that the GH sound in laugh makes the same sound as an F, and that the O in women makes the same sound as a short I, and the TH in lotion makes the same sound as an SH, so that looks like fish. And then they go, oh yeah, and I go, so you see, it's not you, it's English. It's just a crazy, crazy language. And so it kind of takes some of the pressure off of them. And then I'll show you one other quick thing, really. I've seen this going around social media, and is typically followed by some not quite so kind comments, but I feel like it's really a great example of someone who's developed phonemic awareness skills and some of the phonics skills, and has done their best to communicate with the skills that they have. And I also feel like it's also a great example that English could be a lot less complex, but it isn't, you know? So there's an easier way to spell lettuce that makes more sense. So I use that to try to show students that phonics is complicated, but once you master it, once you begin mastering phonics skills, more of the language is accessible and more of the language is easy for you to understand. Fluency is the third component. So we have phonemic awareness, which is letter sound recognition. We have phonics, which is learning how to blend the sounds, and then we have fluency. Fluency is being able to read with speed, accuracy, and expression. If a student doesn't read quickly enough, first of all, if they don't read quickly with complex text, it'll make it very difficult for them to complete their assessments in time, because the TABE is timed, the task HiSET and GD are timed, you know. So if they read really slowly, that's something that they need to work on. But the other thing is, when a student reads really slowly, it's a good sign that they're using their working memory to try to decode each individual word. And when they're so focused on decoding each individual word, they're not focused on understanding what they're reading. So they're focused on one word at a time, whereas most of us, we read a sentence and we know that it's a question or an exclamation before we even get to the end, because we're taking in that entire sentence. Our students are taking in word by word by word, so they don't get to comprehension. So if a student isn't reading fluently, if they're really reading slowly and laboriously with fits and starts, it is not appropriate to focus on comprehension tasks for them until you get them to the point where they can read fluently. If a student isn't reading accuracy, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a moment, if they're not accurate, if they miss a significant amount of words in their reading, that's a sign that you might need to stop focusing on comprehension with that student and go back and maybe focus on phonics, because there's a reason that they don't know how to pronounce the words that are on the paper. So we look at speed, we look at accuracy, and we look at expression. And expression is when a student is reading, and I try to think, an example that I use is if you've ever listened to like a first or second grader read, and they read the words on the page, you know, they read very, very like monotone, no expression. They don't pay any attention to punctuation. They run right from one sentence to another. They're reading that way because they're not processing what they're reading. They're not understanding what they're reading. So if you hear a student who's reading very slowly, if it's very choppy, if they mispronounce a lot of words, if there's no expression, no attention to punctuation, that student is not a fluent reader and they need to focus on either phonics or phonics and increasing their reading fluency before it's okay to really focus on comprehension. Otherwise, they'll struggle. You don't want them to be so frustrated, and so it makes sense to kind of build up those basic skills first. In terms of vocabulary, vocabulary, obviously, comprehension, you can't understand at the sentence or passage or paragraph level if you don't understand individual words. So it's very important to focus on vocabulary. And one of the things that we tell our tutors is that general vocabulary is just as important as the content-specific vocabulary. So in fact, some of the test questions will ask a student to analyze, and some ask students to synthesize, and some ask students to predict or to infer. If they don't have that general vocabulary, if they don't understand what that means almost automatically, then we're setting them up for failure. So we have to focus on building their general vocabulary in addition to their content-specific vocabulary. That's the social studies specific terms and science and mathematics specific terms. And people tend to forget about the math vocabulary, but that's a critical piece of comprehension. Vocabulary is also having the skills to make meaning of unfamiliar words, whether that's context clues or whether it's looking at the prefix or suffix or root. Those are all things that we need to focus on developing, and ReadWorks is actually a good tool, I think, for the vocabulary development. So one of the things that we use in our training at Seeds of Literacy, we do a 6-hour training for all of our tutors, and we have them do this activity. And so I'm just going to do a small part of it. So if you can all just take a moment and read this paragraph that's on your screen. I'll stop talking so you can concentrate. And then I'm going to ask you, what is the job of the followers? If you can, I'm opening the chat. So if you can tell me, what is the job of the followers based on what you see, what you read there? All right, so make the finny and take care of the cuts. Yes, beautiful. So you're able to read this passage. You've probably not encountered these words before, but you were able to sound them all out if you needed to. You were able to decode them. You were able to read it probably fluently, and you were able to answer a question about it. Now, can someone tell me, what is a finny? What is a quig? Can anyone tell me that? Someone says honey, great guess. All right, so let's look. So here's the point of this exercise. It's to show you that if I give you 2 keywords here, so if right here up in the upper corner, quig, if quig means bee and finny means honey, now read the passage and then tell me, is it easier to read the passage now that you have just those 2 extra vocabulary words? Okay. So this is just really to underscore the importance of how much vocabulary impacts comprehension. You're all strong readers. You probably read a lot for pleasure. You have advanced vocabularies, and just not knowing 2 simple words that represented 2 simple ideas, words that you could decode easily, really impacts your comprehension. So we have to focus on vocabulary with our students. So then we have comprehension, and comprehension is really understanding what it is that you've read and knowing how to actually be able to take information from that. I think it's one thing to be able to look at something and to respond to it, to the questions. And we just saw that you can respond to a question without actually knowing the answer. But comprehension is knowing it, understanding the information well enough that you can then use it, whether it's using it to explain it to someone else or using it to make a decision for your life or using it to help administer medication to your child. So comprehension is the very last skill, the most advanced of the 5 components of reading. And it is really, really important. So I'm going to share a story about 2 students really quickly. The first student was a student who she was just, had been coming to the program for a little while. And she'd been, right when I started, she was just expressing frustration. Like, I'm not coming back here. I'm really frustrated. You're not helping me, and I'm not advancing quick enough. And so one of our site coordinators was like, you know, can you talk to this lady? So I sat down with her and I said, you know, I just want to talk to you. I just want to see where you are, what you're doing, and how I can get you to, you know, where you want to go. And the real situation was that she felt like she should be getting harder materials. So I asked her if she could just sit down with me with the materials that she had. And so she was reading this passage about something about the military and trying to get the materials for war. And she read the passage, and then I asked her, I said, so tell me what the passage was about. And I took the paper away from her, you know, just kind of casually moved it. And she nearly dove across the table to grab that paper because she was so dependent on the words on the paper for comprehension. And what she was doing, which was really pretty brilliant, is she would look at the word and say, war and equipment, and then she would just fill in the blanks with what she knew. And so she would say, well, it's about them getting the equipment for the war. And I would say, and so what else can you tell me about it? If she couldn't see words that she could pull together, there was no comprehension whatsoever. Another student that I had, and so actually what ended up happening, I feel like I left that story undone, but what I said to her was, when you're taking the test, you don't want to have to keep going back to the passage. You want to get to the point where you understand this. And quite honestly, a lot of the tests that we have in life don't have answers and answer keys and passages that we can go back to, right? So if you're reading information, say to take care of a sick loved one, you're not going to have questions. You need to just be able to understand it and kind of go from there. So she kind of decided that, you know, maybe I should learn, you know, maybe I do need to be here and maybe I'm not as advanced as I thought. And then she became so much more docile, so much easier to get along with. And the staff was like, what did you say to her? But once she realized what she needed, then it was easier for her to focus on that and to not feel like she was being held back by the staff. We had another student who read a passage, and this was a night that we didn't have a lot of tutors for whatever reason yet. And so he was sitting there and he read a passage, and I said, how are things going? And he said, great. And I said, did you just read this? And he said, yes. And I said, what is it about? And he looked at me and he goes, I'm not even gonna lie, I don't know what I just read, right? And so we sat down and started looking at, you know, how to monitor comprehension as you go, because most of us do that. If I'm reading something and I read a paragraph and I don't know what I'm reading, I don't finish the rest of it. I work on that paragraph until I get it. And so helping students understand that comprehension, that there are skills and tools and strategies for comprehension is really, really important, because that's why they're in our program. They want to comprehend that material so they can pass that test. So thinking about those components, we have phonemic awareness, which is the letter sound recognition and knowing the letter combinations. We have phonics, which is learning how to build words by bringing those sounds together according to our rules and taking them apart according to our rules. We have fluency, which is being able to read at a conversational pace with expression and accuracy. We have vocabulary, which is learning how to make sense out of content area words and general words, and learning how to use the text around words to understand words. And then we have comprehension. What materials are the adult ed materials, which one of those things do they typically focus on? Do you see a lot of stuff on phonics? Do you see a lot of stuff on, you know, the phonemic awareness? Do you see a lot of stuff on fluency? It's pretty much all comprehension, right? So that is really, so basically we're not giving our students everything that they need. And I say that it is no fault of ours. Most of the folks who come into adult literacy don't have, you know, a training, like professional training and education. So we give our best. And I'm saying we can do better when we know more. And so I'm so happy that you're here and realizing this, because you don't need to have specific materials to do this, because we can use all of these, do all of this with reworks, except for phonemic awareness. So moving on, let's see. So I'm going to give a medical analogy because I think it makes this whole thing make a little bit more sense. If I went to the doctor and I said, you know, doctor, I'm not feeling well. I have a fever and chills and a sore throat and I just don't feel well. And he took my temperature and he said, yep, you do have a fever. Go home and get some rest and drink some fluids and come back tomorrow. And I did that. Everything he told me, and I still felt off, and I dragged my little sick self into his office again the next day, and same symptoms and same thing. He takes my temperature again and he sends me back out the door. So the next day, if I wake up and I'm feeling just as bad, how many of you think I'm going to go back to the doctor again when he didn't really help me the first 2 times? Right? So, I mean, I don't think I would. If I'm sick and I'm coming to you and you're not saying anything to me, if I'm coming to you and you're not changing anything, then I'm not going to keep coming back. And I think that's what happens with some of our students. And we think, oh, you know, adult literacy students, they're so, you know, sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not. You just never know what you're going to get. They just drop out all the time. I think a lot of times they drop out because they're frustrated. A lot of times they drop out because they're coming to us to get better and we're giving them the same thing. So in a lot of programs that I've worked in, a lot of programs that I've observed, a lot of programs I've consulted with, I see people giving students a reading packet, and the student reads that packet and they answer the questions and it gets scored. And no matter what their score is, our response is to give them another packet. So they've got this fever and we just keep taking the temperature again and again and again. And that's essentially what giving them packets will do. What needs to happen is there needs to be some kind of intervention to improve their skills in between those readings so that they're more successful each time. So, so that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. We're going to stop giving packets and start giving intervention. So I'm going to describe really quickly how we do things at Seeds. So what we decided was any student who comes in reading under above an 8th grade level can focus on their literacy and focus on digital literacy and workforce. That's kind of what our focus is for those folks. If they come in reading below an 8th grade level, and actually this has changed a little bit with Table 11-12, because with Table 11-12, you only get like 8.0, you don't get the 7.9s and things like that, which I hate. But anyway, so you only know if they're above 8 or below 8. So if our students are below the 8th grade level, we give them a fluency assessment. And we do the fluency assessment because if you read out loud for 60 seconds, I can tell exactly what's happening when you're reading. If you're reading and you skip over any word that you don't recognize, I know that you need to learn how to break words down into syllables so that you don't have to skip over those words anymore. Typically, the words you're skipping over are the most important words in the passage. So how do you comprehend if you're skipping over the key vocabulary? So I can tell you that if you're doing a fluency assessment. If you're reading out loud for me for 60 seconds and you get to the word through and you say thorough, I know that your brain is working faster than what you're like. It's your brain is working so fast that it's filling in gaps instead of looking what's actually on the page. And that's usually a sign that you need a little bit of work with either breaking words into syllables or phonics. So we use this fluency assessment as our guide to determine if a student is ready to just focus on fluency, if they just need to increase their speed, if they just need to increase their accuracy, if they just need to increase their expression, or if they really need some phonics help. And then once if we feel like they need phonics help, we use a phonics assessment that I developed a couple of years ago when I was working with just people in the community who I knew who were struggling with reading. And we use that phonics assessment. It tells us exactly what phonics skills that student knows or doesn't know. And so we don't have to spend a lot of time teaching them things they already know. We focus on the things that they don't know. Who wouldn't want to do that, right? So, so we do that. And during our phonics assessment, we realize that a student doesn't have phonemic awareness skills, then we take a step back and we focus on developing phonemic awareness. And we talk about what the short vowel sounds are, and we talk about what the consonant sounds are, and then we talk about blending those together, and then we start getting back into the phonics and then moving them towards fluency. Anytime we have students, we typically do fluency and phonics in addition to everything else that they're working on, because we don't want the students to feel like they're not making progress. But like really 15 minutes of phonics a day, 15 minutes of fluency a day can totally change a student's reading ability. And it doesn't take a whole lot. Okay, so let's get to ReadWorks and talk about ReadWorks and vocabulary. So if you notice, I'm gonna stop for just 1 second because there's so much activity going on in the chat and the questions I just want to know. So the phonics assessment that we use is one that I created myself. But there are, if you look online, if you just Google phonics assessments, there are tons of them out there. I just feel like ours is kind of more of a shortcut. It gives me a better idea of where they are and what they're doing. And then if you just Google oral reading fluency assessment, Florida has tons of them online for free. And it's just, and they actually have the directions on how to use them as well, so you can do that. ReadWorks Online is absolutely free. I wouldn't have shared it with you if it wasn't. For English language learners, you can either use, you know, I said I wasn't going to answer all the questions, and I can't because I don't have time, but I wanted to at least see what was going on because there's so much activity. So I'll talk about another tool that's very similar to ReadWorks that I think is really awesome for English language learners as well. So looking at vocabulary as far as ReadWorks, the first thing that I suggest our tutors do is when you're working with a student on a ReadWorks lesson. So let's say they bring up the Orchid Secret, which is at an 8th grade level, 1150 Lex file. The passage has 829 words. Let me say one other thing. So you can choose whether you want fiction or nonfiction passages. One of the things that we found is that the nonfiction passages are inappropriate for adults under like grade level 5. So grade level 5 and up are great, but grade level 4 and below, the nonfiction, they're all like child protagonists. So it's like about going to get ice cream with grandpa. So we felt like that was too immature for our adults. So we don't use the nonfiction under the 5th grade level. So I just wanted to say that really quickly. So one thing that I encourage our tutors to do, each of the passages has the word count at the beginning. So I try to get our tutors to use this formula. The first thing that I ask them to do, the formula is at the bottom of this slide. And of course I have a Zoom thing in front of it, so I can't see it. But anyway, so you look at the total number of words in the passage, and then you ask the students to go through the passage and just write down in a notebook the unfamiliar words, the words that they don't think they know how to pronounce, the words that they don't think they understand the meaning of. Just read through it one time, write out all the unfamiliar words. Then what I do is I use this formula. So if I take the total number of words in the passage, which here it's 829, I subtract the number of unfamiliar words that they indicated, and that tells me the number of words that the students can read. Then what I do is I take the words that they can read and I divide them by the total number of words, and that gives me a percentage. And that's the percentage of the passage that the student can read on their own, the passage that's not foreign, that's not unfamiliar. So for example, in this little passage here, there are 136 words, and I underlined words that I thought a student might struggle with. So if there are 8 words that the student's unfamiliar with, that means that there are 128 words that that student can read. If I take the number of words that the student can read, 128, and divide it by the total words in the passage, I get 94% of the passage that the student can read. Why am I doing this? Why do I even care? Well, thinking back to the Phonemic quiz, remember how much having 2 vocabulary words improved your comprehension? If the student can't read half the words in the passage, that passage is too difficult for them. So one of the things that we use is we look at, is a reading, there are 3 different levels of reading. If a reading is in a student's independent reading level, it means that that student can recognize 95% of the words on their own, they can comprehend 95% of the words on their own, and the student can read that without any help from any instructor, and they're good. If something's at the instructional level, which that last passage was at 94%, anything between 90 to 95% word recognition means it's at that student's instructional level, meaning that if they're going to work on that passage, there should be a tutor or a teacher right by their side to help them through that, because there's so much that they're going to need support with. If a passage is below, if a student's comprehension, word recognition is below 90%, if it's below 90%, then it's at that student's frustration level. So someone sent an email into Mariah earlier today and asked about, what do I do with reluctant readers? And I think my response to that is, if you have a reluctant reader, whether they're an ELL learner or English is their first language, people are reluctant to do things that are difficult. People are reluctant to do things that make them feel like a failure. And so I'll have colleagues in Cleveland who are like, well, these students don't read. I'm like, that's not true. It isn't true that they don't read. They don't read because they are struggling with reading. And if your attitude is just to dismiss them because they don't do things the way that you think, maybe adult literacy isn't the right field for you. I'm not exactly sure. So I try to look at what students are reading and if it's actually appropriate for them. And so there are a couple of things that I can do. If a student is below that 90%, I'm probably going to just choose a different passage for them. If they're in that 90 to 94%, we're going to define that vocabulary. And when I say define the vocabulary, I mean we're going to talk about what the words mean. They're going to write down the definition in their own words, not the dictionary definition, because dictionary definitions can be, unless you have an adult, there are some adult learner dictionaries out there that are pretty good. But if they put it in their own words, they're more likely to remember it. I also believe that students should be given, so when they're defining something, try to get them to give an example of it or a non-example. So if they're trying to figure out what's a mammal, if you give an example of a mammal, they'll remember that. They'll make that connection, and it kind of develops their neural pathways a little bit better. But if you give them a non-example, then it's like, oh, okay. So a really good example is, for my daughter would say, oh, well, that's ironic. And I have to tell her, like, that's not ironic. That's funny. Irony would be blah, 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 you know? So giving examples and giving non-examples help students to make those definitions more personal, more internalized, and they understand it a little bit better. So, so talking about phonics, I'm just going to point out one word on this page, but looking at the word unique, excuse me, I worked with 2 students really recently. So if I'm working with a student on reworks and they get to the word unique, most adult learners, or many adult learners, will get to the word unique and they'll see that UN, if they learn that in their phonics when they're in elementary, they'll struggle. Unique, like they're not exactly sure what it is. But I can take this word unique and turn that into a phonics lesson. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the student that there's sometimes the letter U stands on its own, and that's technically, it's called an open syllable. Students don't necessarily need to know that. I usually will tell students just because I like to explain things and let them to understand what they are. But an open syllable is when a vowel stands by itself. And so now I can say, what are some other words that we know of where the vowel says its own name or stands by itself and it's in its own syllable by itself? So we might think of unique. We might think of uniform. We might think of unicorn. We might think of ego. We might think of ego. And so we'll just kind of brainstorm all of these words that have these vowels that stand alone or these open syllables. And we'll just kind of talk about them. And so instead of them just learning this word, they're learning a skill that will help them with decoding a lot of other words. Word endings. That IQUE is so tricky because students don't know what to do with it, right? But if I show them this word and then I help them, like we think of other words. So if I say, anytime you see that IQUE, you're going to hear the sound eek, right? And sometimes I get silly and I'll go eek, you know, whatever, just to kind of give them like that, like they'll remember me being that goofy and they won't forget the sound that makes, right? So I'll give them that. And then I'll say, what other words have eek in it? And I'll think, so unique, what other words? And then they'll start, I'll give them maybe 1 or 2. I'll say, what about mystique? And they'll go, oh yeah. Or like, what about, my nephew's name is Dominique. Yes, IQUE. So they start making that association. Then anytime they see that IQUE, they've got it. They know it. We've created this whole list that they have to reference. So you can turn some of these ReadWorks lessons into phonics lessons if you're helping them understand certain words, right? Or certain sounds. The word scent over here, that's a great way to teach them that sometimes SC together makes the S sound, that sound, and sometimes SC together is like score, right? So you can turn that into a lesson where they're just kind of looking at the words and looking at the parts of the words and learning what those are, and then brainstorming other words that have those similar parts. And in that way, they're processing lots of words at one time instead of trying to learn one word and remember it. They're learning an entire family of words. So for comprehension, one of the things, oh, I'm sorry, wait a second. I feel like I skipped a slide. Did I? Okay, well, I'm gonna just throw this in here. So for fluency, the best way for a student to become a more fluent reader is by repeated oral reading and by watching other readers that they've modeled. And the best story I can give you for this is a young lady I worked with. She was like maybe 10 or 11 years old at the time, and she was reading the story about this girl, and the girl was walking by the farmer's market, and she saw this Granny Smith apple and a sea of red delicious apples, and she was so distracted by that she didn't see the trolley coming, and she got hit by the trolley and ended up in the emergency room. So this young lady read this whole entire passage for me, and I said, so what is the passage about? And she's like, I don't know, it's about apples in the water. So she took the sea of apples very, very literally. So that gave us some time to talk about figurative language. But what happened when she read that passage the first time, it just was so laborious for her. So then I read it and she followed along as I read it. And then she read it again. And her second time reading it, it sounded like another kid. So that's a technique that I like to use with adult learners as well, is to have them read a passage and then have the tutor read the passage for them to model fluent reading, to model the expression, to help smooth out the pronunciation of some of the vocabulary, to show them how to stop at the punctuation, that I might take a slight pause at a comma, a longer one after a period. So it's a way to model exactly what they're trying to do. And that repetition is actually really helpful. What we do at Seeds is we have students read the passage and the tutor times them with a stopwatch. So they stop reading, so they read the entire passage, the tutor times them, they write down the amount of time it took the student to read through the entire passage. Then we give the student headphones and the students play the audio and they listen to the audio and they practice reading along with the audio. Now, some of the audio in ReadWorks is like computer generated audio, so it sounds a little bit weird. And some students don't mind that at all. Others are actual human voices, and you can actually select that in that first menu. I should have shown you that earlier, I'm sorry. You can select that in that first menu that you only want the human voice if you want. Of course, it'll limit the number of passages that you have available. But anyway, letting the students will listen to that a couple times, 3 or 4 times, and just practice, and then they'll read again to the tutor. And when they read it the second time, it's timed again. And they're astonished that they've cut 30 seconds off of their time for just having practiced the session. What it teaches them is that practicing helps. That practicing does make me a better reader. The more I read, the better I read. But that modeling is also really important, particularly if the tutor has done what I suggested and done the vocabulary work already. That way, those vocabulary words, they're practicing it in context, they're more likely to remember it. So it's a great tool to use for comprehension, for fluency. And then for comprehension, one of the things that I do is, again, instead of asking students to read a whole passage and tell me what the entire passage was about, I'll ask them to just read a paragraph and do what I do. If I open any of my books, this is one of the books I taught this semester, you'll notice, I don't know if you can see this, but every single margin of my book has little notes, every paragraph, because if I read a paragraph, I'm teaching this course again, I'm not reading this book every time I teach it. So I'll read a paragraph and I'll just write a 4 or 5 word summary in the margins. And I take my books and articles to work so that my students can see that these are tools that I use. So if they're tools that I use, then you can use them too and they can help you. A lot of times they think that the rest of us just read well because we just have the gift. They don't know that we have all these tools and strategies. So this is a good opportunity to use the strategies that you use to help you comprehend, to help the students comprehend. So reading paragraph by paragraph and writing paragraph summaries is one tool that I like to use. And I think ReadWorks makes it very easy. Another alternative to ReadWorks is CommonLit. And I think I have, I don't know if I can get to it because of the way that these, okay, let me close this. Let me say one other thing. So we use, one of the things that we use since we've been on social distancing, since we've been outside of our site, a lot of our students don't have access to computers. We've had some wonderful donations that have allowed us to give away about 40 of them to students. But for the students who don't have computers, well, one thing that we have done is we've gotten our tutors to create free conference call lines. So the students can call into the conference call line and talk to a tutor, and the tutor can help them through something that they're working on. So that's another resource that you can use if you want if you want to be able to connect to students long distance and still be able to help them through something. If you print something and mail it to them and then you can pull it up and you're reading the same thing, you can continue to model that fluent reading for them. You can see what vocabulary they're having trouble with. All of those tools. The thing I like about CommonLit is also available in Espanol, which I think is beautiful because we do have students in our program who are studying for the GD in Spanish. So it works very similarly to ReadWorks with the lexiles, the genres, and things, you know, all of those things, all of those options. So that's another cool tool that you can use. And the other one is, I'm not sure if this is Newsella or Newsela because I've heard salespeople use it both ways, but there are articles that I think that also are more interesting to students than some of the ReadWorks ones or the CommonLit articles because they're about things that are happening in the news and in the world that actually impact people. And again, there are multiple grade levels. And then last, there's a program that I haven't really explored a whole lot myself. It's called Read Theory, but the reason I'm recommending it, even though I haven't used it, is that I've heard a lot of teachers rave about how they like it, because you don't have to do your own assessments for them. They have an assessment built in for the students, and then they select passages based on the results of that assessment, and then their readings come with comprehension questions. So if that's something that you're interested in, you might want to check that out a little bit more. So outside of that, I think I've covered everything. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Sharon, and I will definitely.
Carmen, thank you so much. You've done just a fantastic job, and that's what we're hearing from everybody. You know, there's a lot of wonderful comments in the chat box, and we also have a lot of questions in the Q&A. And I know when you and I were chatting earlier before we got started with this, we were saying that we knew we wouldn't be able to get to all of these. So I just wanted to, first of all, tell everybody, you know, thank you for taking that time to attend. Please take our webinar that's in process right now. And also, Carmen has been extremely gracious in offering that she'd be willing to look at the questions in a Q&A and we'll be able to send them out tomorrow. So please rest assured that we're going to get to your questions and that we are going to be sure to send them out when the Zoom goes out tomorrow. So I wanted to also mention everybody that attended this will be able to receive a certificate of completion that comes directly from Zoom. In that Zoom link will also be a link to these questions along with Carmen's answers. So thank you so much, Carmen, for that. Thank you everybody for participating in this. And we have just a couple minutes left. So Carmen, do you have any last thoughts before we close out today?
I would just say, honestly, if anyone ever has any questions, please feel free to contact me. I say that all the time. No one ever does, but I'm definitely open to sharing resources and information. My goal is for us to eliminate illiteracy in the adult population.
Wonderful. Well, we really appreciate that. And we really appreciate everybody taking their Friday afternoon with us. And we hope to see all of you at the COEB conference. Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to all the attendees. Okay, we'll see you all soon. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.